I think most owners and founders would love if that was the case for them. So no, that's awesome. That's probably a piece of why you've been able to grow 108%.
Sure.
Explain to us all the strategies there. Like how did that occur? Obviously being part of the Inc. 5000, super cool, but the growth is really the super exciting part.
Have you ever wondered how successful architecture, engineering, and construction companies scale their business?
Or have you ever wanted guidance on how to get more growth, wealth, and freedom from your AEC company?
Well, then you're in luck. Hi, I'm Will Forat.
And I'm Justin Nagel, and we're your podcast hosts.
We interview successful AEC business leaders to learn how they use people, process, and technology to scale their businesses.
So sit back and get ready to learn from the industry's best. This is
Building Scale.
Hey listeners, it's Will here. Our mission is to help the AEC industry protect itself by making technology easy. If you've ever listened to our show, then you know that the 3 pillars of scaling a business are people, process, and technology. So if you suspect technology is your weak link, then book a call with us to see where we can help maximize your company's IT and cybersecurity strategy. Just go to buildingscale.net/help.
Today's guest is the founder of Southern Steel Engineers, or SSE, Tyler Sease. SSE is a structural engineering firm specializing in delegated steel design, including connection design, shop drawing reviews, and erection engineering. Tyler Sease is a licensed professional engineer, a structural engineer, and a certified welding inspector with over 15 years of experience in structural engineering and steel construction. They hold engineering licenses from 46 states, bringing a nationwide perspective to steel design and construction. Under his leadership, SSE has earned recognition as the best firm to work for by Swide Group in 2024 and is featured on the Inc. 5000 list for its 108% growth rate. Tyler leads a team of 13, delivering innovative and cost-effective steel solutions while fostering an award-winning company culture. And with all that said, Tyler, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. As we said before, I don't have a whiteboard anymore. I moved places. So I don't want the
totally different
people that view the podcast on Spotify or YouTube or wherever, they don't get alarmed that I'm somewhere else. So, yes, but I said a bunch of nice stuff, Tyler, but tell us the true story. How'd you get into the space, and tell us about SSE?
Yeah, so I guess I kind of got led into steel. My father had a steel detailing business, so I started working with him when I was a teenager, came to work with him in the summers before I could drive or anything, started learning steel, and always liked math and science, so went into engineering, and with the steel background, kind of geared towards structural engineering. And after college, started with a steel fabricator, doing structural engineering for all sorts of steel projects. And one thing led to another. And eventually in 2017, started SSE. And we've just been building scale since then and just growing. And yeah, that's kind of the gist of it.
Got it. So you are very niched in comparison to like a steel erector or something like that. Explain that a little bit for listeners so they have a good understanding.
So we're a niche firm. So most structural engineering firms work primarily for architects, whereas we work primarily for steel fabricators, steel detailers, or steel erectors. And then while a typical structural engineering firm will work in all different building materials, steel, concrete, wood, light gauge, masonry, we're really focused on steel. By being niche, it allows us to specialize in steel and really develop a level of expertise where we can really serve our clients really well. So that's what we're specialized in, and that's what we do.
So tell us a little bit about your background, right? Because you were not, you weren't always in here. You were in a very, very large company.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk a little bit about that and then what translates?
Yeah,
really
so
big.
I started out working for a large Fortune 500 company. So we were a structural engineering department within CMC, Commercial Metals. So we worked for the steel fabricators. So it was kind of a little bit of a hybrid because our group was 10 to 12 engineers, but we're part of a massive company. So I got to see kind of some of the benefits of large corporate structures and some of the kind of downsides of large corporate structures. And so when I started SSE, we tried to really emphasize building out a strong benefits program. I mean, initially we didn't have that, but the goal was to build it up, and we did that. And then a lot of organization within our company. But then on the other side, moving away from the corporate structure, really wanted to put an emphasis on a team approach from the standpoint of being able to have a pretty flat organization where we can make decisions quickly. Large corporate structures just lend themselves to layers of hierarchy, and rightfully so, that's how it works. But we're able to be very nimble and make decisions quickly, make judgment calls, which is nice. So if recently we had an employee whose daughter was in the hospital for a few weeks, and we were able to make an exception and let them handle that and not have any repercussions here, or we were able to pay them for that time and let them handle that on a personal side. So those are things that as a small business, we're able to do that maybe large businesses aren't able to accommodate. So
A difference in cultures, a small business compared to large.
yeah. I mean, it's and we're still a small business. We've grown a lot, but we're at 13 people now, but everybody knows everybody. We've got a very team oriented approach and able to be very collaborative across the whole company.
So what doesn't work? What doesn't translate from, I mean, they're a Fortune 500 company. What doesn't translate? Because, I mean, they've scaled, right? Fortune 500, you have to have scaled. So what doesn't, some things don't translate or don't work well on the smaller business side. What have you seen that doesn't work well?
I mean, I guess one thing would be that we have to wear a lot of hats. We don't have departments. We don't have an HR department. We don't have an IT department. Especially early on, I was having to do a little bit of everything. As we've scaled up, we've added our office manager now helps with a variety of areas, but we don't have a full dedicated team for any of the business departments of the company, if that makes sense. So if it's accounting or HR or IT, we've kind of got to be able to jump in and help where needed and figure things out and be very flexible. So whereas with a large corporate structure, you've got a lot of silos of different areas that people stay focused in. We're spread out more in different areas.
I guess this kind of really translates to talking about people, managing people then, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because it looks a little different, wearing multiple hats and whatnot.
Sure.
Which means that hiring people isn't just about hiring, isn't specific to exactly one job. This is your cog, this is your job, and then that's it, right? There's obviously a lot more to it. Tell us a little bit about, we'll say, your learning lessons in hiring your people.
Yeah. So as we've grown, we've been able to get a little bit more compartmentalized with certain positions to where they're more down to their job responsibilities. Like early on, myself and our VP, we were wearing all the hats, doing a little bit of everything. In terms of hiring, some of it, I don't know if we've done a good job or we've just gotten lucky, but we've got a really great team, and we've not had an issue with turnover, and we put a lot of work into trying to hire the right people. Sometimes it's hard to even know until you actually get somebody on board and start working with them, but you make the best decisions you can based on the information you have. The one thing that we implemented probably 5 years ago or so was an assessment that we use. And it measures a variety of personality traits, but also cognitive traits. So we're able to get some information to objectively compare candidates and make sure they fit in with our team, and also make sure, like, one of the aspects of our assessment is 3D visualization, spatial visualization. So it's got all these different cubes and geometric shapes and shows different rotations. And then you have to be able to look at it and tell if they're the same shape or not, just rotated. And that's something that we've had PhD candidates that completely didn't get any of those right. And then we've had other people, like maybe for an office manager role, that they can see that stuff. So a large part of what we do is seeing things in 3D, looking at 3D models, looking at drawings and being able to visualize in 3D. So that's just a small part of what we do to kind of make sure we're getting the right people. That's on the cognitive side. And that's a skill that I'm not sure how much of that is purely natural and how much can be learned. But I think that's something that, I mean, you're not learning that in school. It's kind of, and in large part, I think most people can either kind of do that or not. So that's part of it. But other parts are like liking a structured environment. So if we are looking to hiring an engineer, engineers have to be very regimented. We have to follow codes. We have to provide calculations. We have to do things in a consistent, methodical approach. If someone comes up on the assessment as liking a very flexible workspace where they can kind of do things their own way, that's probably not the right fit for what we're looking for. There's nothing wrong with that. There's other positions that's good for, but from an engineering standpoint, that wouldn't be a good fit.
That really then brings liability to the company.
Right. Yeah.
The opposite effect is if you're not regimented, you miss a step, skip a step. Either something happens with the building, falls apart, or someone gets hurt.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and that's something we have to always keep in mind is what we're doing is really important. We can't afford mistakes because it's not just money involved. If a structure fails, I mean, there could be loss of life, and that's the last thing we ever want to have to deal with. And so we have to maintain a very high level of accuracy and know that we can trust our team.
How are you able to be still structured with such a high growth rate, right? Obviously, we've seen this at Spot. When you grow significantly, it creates problems operationally, right? Like that's inherently what happens. So you guys grew a ton. So how were you able to stay on top of that?
There's been some challenges. Part of it is from the beginning, we've tried to, even when we were 2 or 3 people, we tried to think long term and put together processes of how we were going to do things to help keep us consistent and give us an approach that people could follow. And we've had to work through that and really put effort into improving our processes along the way and making them more repeatable. And then we're still working through now really documenting that even better, because for a while we were adding 1 employee a year. And then since 22, it's been 2 or 3 a year. So I guess at times there's been a lot on our project managers to really stay on top of new hires and get them to a point where they either know what to do or they understand their limitations and know when to ask questions and get help. That's a big thing too.
Are you hiring before the need or hiring crap? We should have hired 6 months ago. Cause I assume that what you do is fairly technical. So either you're hiring somebody that's super veteran or you're hiring somebody that needs a lot of training, right? So actually share your kind of hiring philosophy in that regard, what it looks like.
Yeah, we've tried to stay in front of it as much as we could. That's been difficult at times because some of our largest clients, they've gone through huge growth rates as well. So it's been hard to keep up at times with their demand. But yeah, we've tried to stay in front of it and we've tried to identify which areas of the business we needed help in next. So like, I guess in 22, we hired an estimator for the first time. Before that, our engineers were doing all of our estimating for new projects. So that was something that helped build capacity by getting some of that work to someone who could focus on estimating. And then just this year, we hired someone to help out with shop drawing reviews. So it's a steel detailer with 30 years of experience, and he's been a big help to our team and given us the ability to have our engineering team have more help on different aspects of the project. And that has helped lead to growth as well, because while we didn't add engineering capacity with that role, we were able to free up more engineering time with that role.
So you're essentially looking at the services, how much time is spent on the actual service. Some companies call it billable hours, right?
Yeah.
But then this is in our world, we call this soft cost, right? What is killing you, death by 1,000 paper cuts or otherwise? These are soft costs that don't show up on the P&L. They don't show up. The only other indicators that you have is sort of whatever metrics you have for productivity, but even that's hard to measure. But knowing that you've pulled some of those job functions off of either a group of people or everyone's sort of responsible, but no one's actually responsible for some of those internal components, right? So if you pull it off of, let's say, 3-5 people, every single one of them has now gotten a little bit more time to work on, we'll call it the billable hour, versus what's not billable, but still important, because you can't operate if you don't do the internal stuff.
That's right. Yeah. And our office managers helped out a lot too in different processes. Like when we get in updated drawings on projects, kind of having a standardized way of doing that and taking more workload off of our engineering team, because our engineering team has been at max capacity for several years now. We've kind of just constantly doing our best to keep up from a growth standpoint. So we've grown a lot outside of our engineering roles in the past 2 years. We've added engineers too, but we've really made the jump from having just engineers to having more positions that are able to help our business overall.
Supporting roles for the engineers. If you look at pretty much the entire industry, architectural engineering, it's all service. Yes, there's a lot of, there's a lot of hardware, if you will. There's a lot of hard components to them, wood, steel, etc. Right? Yeah. This is your cost of goods sold for creating the structures. But then the people side, this is where you have the ability to manage it better, right? So you said max capacity, but your max capacity for your engineers changed even by pulling, let's say, some of the stuff that's not directly billable. That's one way to change the max capacity of your engineers, right? So all of a sudden, right. And so yes, they've been working full time. They've been working potentially even overtime, but now the capacity is even higher because they pulled up just that soft cost of time considering into it.
That's right. Yeah. And that was something we looked at. We do annual strategic planning each year in January. And that was something we looked at last year. And I was looking at our projected engineering hours and kind of our revenue goals, and looked at the fact that if we hired someone to help out with shop drawing review, how much that would help free up engineering hours, because we have more shop drawing review than one person can handle, but that really frees up a lot of time for our engineering team and really adds to our capacity and ability to drive more revenue growth.
So how do you evaluate, let's say as you were doing it strategically, how do you evaluate that? How do you figure out that, this is time spent that should be offloaded to someone else?
Yeah. So some of it is looking at so we track our time in a different way than a lot of firms. We're not looking at, so we don't do timesheets in a traditional sense, but we track time on projects to make sure we're staying on budget. But if people are spending time on development items or professional development, we're not worried about our team not carrying their weight and working hard. So we're not tracking that stuff. But so each year I look at how much time spent in our different service areas. And then we look at projected needs for the following year and try to determine where we could use help. And whether that's someone in connection design, an engineer for connection design, or engineer for miscellaneous design, or shop drawing review, or maybe our engineers are spending too much time on estimating. We're trying to identify where we could use people to help us continue to grow and not get bottlenecked. And that's something that we've dealt with. When you're a small firm and two people are on vacation at the same time, it's a disaster. So that's something that we've tried to, as we've grown, we're trying to make sure we have redundant personnel. Well, not personnel, but from the standpoint of we have a backup option for each important function in the business, so that if somebody in estimating is out on vacation, we've got someone else to cover. If somebody in connection design is on vacation, we've got somebody to cover. And growing that makes us more resilient, because we're not it still matters anytime when you're 13 people one person's on vacation for a week, it still makes an impact, but we're able to better work around that now than we were in the past. And then from a projection standpoint, like back to strategic planning, one thing we look at is our revenue per employee or revenue per engineer. And we're able to kind of make pretty good guesses at what our revenue targets are for the following year based on those numbers, because we've got a lot of good data now. We actually, a couple of years ago, I got really lucky and got within 1% of what our revenue ended up being. That was more luck than skill. But yeah, it's pretty
right at least twice a day, right?
That's right. So, but it's a pretty good guess at where we're gonna fall and kind of what revenue range we can get to with a certain amount of trained people. But that's the big thing. You got to have people that are trained well and understand what they're doing and can deliver at a high level.
So let's talk about that for a second. Training. How long does it take to get someone that's newly hired to the point where they're able to start producing? They might not be effectively producing, but let's just get them to producing and then further that to effectively producing.
It varies a little bit. So we've hired now probably, I think, 5 engineers right out of college.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got a track record now of kind of knowing how to train those engineers up, because I tell people sometimes in interviews and they don't like it, but I was like, you've learned probably 10% of what you need to know with your bachelor's degree. There's a lot you have to learn outside of school. But I would say in general, the first 3 to 4 months are pretty much a watch. There's not going to be a lot of production there. We're expecting the first 3 to 4 months are largely training, and we'll get them involved on projects and working on things once they start getting a feel, but it's not very productive, and that's fine. That's part of the process, and we're expecting that. And usually by the time they hit 6 months, they're starting to help out more. And by a year, usually people are we've got them to a spot that they're pretty productive. They're not fully trained yet. They don't know everything. And really in this business, you never know everything. There's always something to learn. But the first 3 to 4 months, we're not getting much production at all out of new hires. It takes some time.
So in other words, you're losing revenue on them.
Yeah. So if we were to hire somebody, an engineer right out of college, and they stuck around 6 months and left, that really wouldn't be good for us.
So then how do you make sure that they do stay longer than 6 months?
Well, fortunately, every engineer we've hired is still with us. We've done a good job of, like I said, with hiring, we've either done a good job or we've gotten really lucky because we've made good hires. And I think part of it is we don't put unrealistic expectations on them initially from a training standpoint or knowledge standpoint. We expect them to not be productive the first 3 months. And we'll explain to them, like, now's the time, ask all the questions. Like, don't worry about whether you think it's a dumb question. Like, ask all your questions. And our team is very collaborative, and we are in office, so that helps a lot with training, I think, and doing that in person. And we try to be patient with people early on and really focus on the fundamentals and teaching them the background in the business and the engineering of what we do. And I think that has helped a lot in retention. And then aside from the training, it's good benefits and a supportive team approach and things like that help as well.
How do you manage effectively? Like, did you manage prior? And then if you did, what did you learn from that? And then if not, how have you discovered your own path for managing people, right? Obviously you got to hire the right people, right? That's step. And look, it sounds like that piece is happening, but you're also, they're sticking around, right? So like inherently you must be doing at least something pretty well.
Yeah, so the answer to that is no. I'd never managed anybody before, and it was purely like trial by fire. So kind of just figuring it out as we went. And I mean, I've made mistakes. I mean, I've had to learn and try to educate myself on how to manage people and how to manage different types of people. And I'm still trying to get better at that and still learning, because something that works for one person may not work for another person. And Some people take constructive criticism fine and others take it differently, and you have to approach it a different way, and something I'm continuously trying to learn and get better at as we grow.
I just had a similar conversation with somebody about every person's different, right? Like every person responds differently, and your job as the leader is to figure that out. What is their way that you're going to then get the most out of them? If you did everything the same all the time for everybody, you probably get, some people would be better, some people would be a little worse, and you might get some form of consistency. But if you want to truly get the most out of people, you got to understand them and how they tick.
That's right. Yeah. And as we added non-engineering positions, that was a little more of a challenge because not all engineers are the same, but in large part, engineers are pretty introverted and logic-based and kind of have a lot of similarities. So as we added people in different roles, we had more personalities and different types of people that I had to learn to help manage and learn how to work efficiently with them.
Not to mention their definition of fun is a little different too.
Yeah. Yeah. Not everybody loves spreadsheets the way engineers do.
Weird. Super weird. So what you do is very, very technical, or, very, very similar. It has to, right? You have the quality of what you do has to be there. So do you have full documentation of your processes? Like what does that look like as you're training people, but then also just for people to have as a resource as they go?
We're not where we want to be. We have some of it documented well, but that's something that we set goals each quarter and each year, and that's something we want to hit hard in Q1 is working on really tying down our documentation for some of that, for standard procedures. Some of it, the other part of it is, so we have a company intranet that we're building out, and it's within there, we have a knowledge base that we're working on. And so right now we don't have AI in that software. At some point, we either will or we'll move to something else that people will be able to ask questions to and get more out of that knowledge base quicker. So that's something that we want to keep building that data so that even if we're not using it from that standpoint yet, we will at some point. And yeah, right now it's a lot of things had to be passed down kind of from engineer to engineer if this is how we do things. And we're trying to now really formalize that a lot better so that people can reference it, or when we hire somebody new, they have that to lean on.
Do you feel like everything has to be written down, or because then maybe I should ask, is all the documentation, is it written, is it in video format? How do you document? Let's start with that.
Right now it's written, or it's documents or snapshots or stuff like that. We haven't gone the video route yet. Engineers don't like video or being on video, so our team would not be terribly receptive to that idea. But so we may consider that in the future, because I know there's some really good programs out there to help with documenting and different things like that.
So if it's written, right, and it takes, we'll say 4 months or so, 3 to 6 months to get someone to the point of where they're productive, not necessarily efficient, but they're productive. At what point do you say, here you go, right? Do you remove the human interaction side? So let's say you had everything perfectly documented. Is that even possible to essentially say, here you go, and go read through this, and then you can start working as soon as you finish reading through that? Does it work like that?
I think that'd be tough. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but it would be tough. But yeah, it could be done in certain areas, because there are some things that are more straightforward and more consistent project to project, and other things that vary more and take a lot more experience to see the 100 different ways something may happen on different types of projects. But yeah, certain areas I think could be tied down pretty well.
So this is, in our company, this is what we call the difference between science and art of working on whatever it is.
Right.
Just like cooking, there's a recipe, right? Or there's a way to go about it. It's very structured. But then there's the art, which is in what order you do certain things. based on the client or based on the needs, right? There's the human aspect.
Yeah.
Is the training with the human aspect, because I'm assuming that's part of where that really happens. And engineers, at least my experience with engineers has been is that the communication isn't necessarily taught at school on how to communicate with, let's say, end clients.
Sure.
Is that the parts that you're talking about, or is there something more?
I would say it's more than that. The communication with clients doesn't really happen until, for us, we like to wait until engineers have their PEs, their professional engineering license, before we have them dealing with clients a whole lot. So that gets them 3 to 4 years of experience and more experience in the field and knowledge before they're to that point. But yeah, that's a big thing, because a lot of engineers, it takes a while for them to develop those skills and know how to deal with clients and the personal side of things. And so that kind of comes later. We hit that kind of year 4 and 5. This is where we start really pushing that. But yeah, and there are certain engineers that maybe their path is more technical and they're not really, they may not enjoy the interactions side and may not be overly skilled at that, but they may be great from a technical standpoint. So, that doesn't really fit with our team, but engineers I had in the past that I've worked with in the past have been that way at certain ones. And there can be roles for that. But yeah, it's a big need and something that's not learned in school. You really have to have experience.
So, okay. So there's obviously training that has to happen, can't all be documented. And really, are you in person or remote or a bit of both?
Yeah, we're in person in the office. So we have the ability to work remote and have people work hybrid from time to time, but we're largely in the office as our approach.
So tell us a little bit about sort of how the different pieces are learned. So you're documenting. Does anyone that's newer, do they just ask any random engineer, hey, or any person in the company, hey, how do you do this? Is that how it works?
No, we generally try to pair people up a little bit. They may have one person they deal with more so than others, or maybe two, but they're pretty well targeted and paired up with the people that we expect them to be working with the most. And it depends which area they're going to be working in. Our main 2 service areas are steel connection design and miscellaneous steel design. So depending on where we have the biggest need, we'll pair people up with someone in the same service area that they are.
Okay. So if you're pairing them up, is the person that you're pairing them up with know everything that's needed to know about the company, or how things are done process-wise?
That's the hope. Yeah. We're doing that with, we make sure it's somebody that knows what they need to be training, or if there's a need to have multiple people helping train the new hire, then we'll have someone hit maybe somebody hits the technical side and somebody else explains the project management side or the business side or the why things are done.
Has every hire worked out for you?
Not quite. So from purely the engineering roles, every engineer we've hired is here and is a great fit. We've got a perfect track record there. In some of the other supportive roles, we've had a little more growing pains. There's really only a couple hires that I look back on and think I should have seen that coming or realized that it wasn't going to be the right fit. And it wasn't. None of them were bad people or anything. It was just sometimes not the right fit, whether it's from our standpoint of what we needed or from their standpoint of what their skills were, what they were looking for. So like our office manager role, we've been through a couple hires there that didn't work out. And one of those, it was our first office manager hire was in February of 2020. And she had been a stay-at-home mom and had a couple kids in school, and she was ready to get a job. And then, COVID happened and that changed everything there. And she ended up resigning after, I think, 2 months because now her kids were at home doing school remotely. And there's nothing really looking back on that we could have done differently there. It just ended up not being the right fit for her. because everything changed at that point. But, yeah, outside of that, there's another hire that ended up just not being the right fit. And we both knew it after probably 6 weeks and moved on, and, no hard feelings. But yeah, otherwise we've been pretty fortunate from a hiring standpoint.
Yeah, your track record is actually very good, right? Like if it's like, oh, there's 2 positions that were harder, but all of what we do as a service, those all worked out great. Like that's a good place to be. I think most owners and founders would love if that was the case for them. So no, that's awesome. That's probably a piece of why you've been able to grow 108%.
Sure.
Explain to us all the strategies there. Like how did that occur? Obviously being part of the Inc. 5000, super cool, but the growth is really the super exciting part.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the interesting part to me that I'm proud of making that list is the fact that that wasn't a goal. It just kind of happened because we were trying to help grow to serve our clients. And there were times we probably could have grown faster, but I didn't want to hire too many people too quickly to the point where our work product diminished. We had to maintain quality. And there were some growing pains at times with that growth, but we did a pretty good job of making sure we didn't grow so fast that our work went downhill and our reputation did as well. So we kind of managed that pretty well and grew and in a sustainable way, in a way that was methodical, and have continued to grow. This year, our growth rate's not going to be as high. It's slowing down a little bit, but we're continuing to grow. We're building an office addition right now that'll give us 50% more space so that we have room for continued growth over the next few years.
How were you so wise to know that you didn't want to grow as fast, right? Like everybody wants to grow, right? Like that's pretty straightforward, especially if you're on this show. You want to grow. Like that's there's no question about that. However, growth can get dangerous, right? To your point, like you throw quality out the window and things like that can occur. How did you know to say no to certain things or to not, try to market in certain ways? Like how did you know that you didn't want to do it that way?
Some of it was just gut feel and kind of feelings of where we're at in terms of our processes and whether we were with the staff. We had a fairly young staff at one point because we had hired a lot of engineers out of college, and it was letting them get to the point where they were more experienced and could take on more that we were able to keep hiring and grow further. But really, a lot of it comes down to knowing the importance of what we're doing and the fact that we can't make mistakes. Like, not saying we're perfect. We do make mistakes, but they have to be minimal mistakes. They have to be small mistakes because we can't put bad quality work out there when what we're doing is designing steel for structures that have a huge amount of money and resources tied to them. So we had to make sure that as we were growing, we were maintaining quality and make sure we could continue to do that as we grew.
You mentioned something which I found interesting. How do you quantify minimal mistakes, right? So when does it become a big mistake versus minimal mistake? Yep, this is fine. This is totally understandable or whatever, right? Versus major mistake, major F up where someone could get potentially fired or otherwise, right? Where's the line? Or maybe I'm blowing it out of proportion, but where's the line where minimal mistake, okay, this is just part of your path, versus what is that next? So I guess this is kind of a 2-part question. What is that next level of sort of consequences versus minimal mistake?
So one way I explained that to our team a few months ago was, will the client remember this in a year? So if you miss a schedule by a day, they might be upset right then. And we don't want to miss schedules, but I'd rather miss a schedule than send out something that's not accurate or not complete to our standards. Part of it is if they'll remember it in a year, then it's probably a major mistake. If it's a mix up between whether we provided bolts in a connection or welds for the field, and it's one connection, maybe that's a mistake if it doesn't meet what they wanted, but that's probably not something they're going to remember in a year. But if we screw up a connection that happens 3 on a large data center, that's something they're going to remember and something that could end a relationship. So really, ultimately, the biggest things that we can't have happen are mistakes that could lead to failures, because costing money or schedule is one thing, but failures are another. And that's something that we just have to absolutely do everything we can to avoid.
Do you have one of those signs at like a nuclear plant where it's like 0 days since last incident, and yours is like since 2017, since last incident?
No, we don't have that, but.
So it's an interesting, so I really like the concept. I love the mindset. I think for someone that's experienced, it's really easy to understand what that level of mistakes is or are. What about someone new or someone newer? You even said, right, when they come out of college, they only know 10% of what they need to know. So for them to understand sort of which mistakes are more okay and which mistakes are less okay, like, you know, okay, structural failures, right? Not okay. I think everyone can understand that,
Sure.
Right? But if that's the extreme, that's a level 10, we'll call it problem, right?
Right.
And a level 1 is I left my pencil in the truck or whatever, you know, something just asinine like that, right? So because you are dealing with either you're dealing with your own internal team or they're dealing with clients, how do they evaluate that, especially if they don't have the experience yet to understand this sort of framework or mindset of, will the client remember this in a year? Is it actually understood, or is it still?
No, but I would say it's up to myself and our project management and our leaders to not put them in a position to make that kind of mistake. So we have to be aware of what they are ready to handle and be able to review and manage what they're working on to keep them from being able to make any large mistakes. So I would say if a new engineer that was less than a year of experience made a level 10 mistake, well, that's maybe partially their fault, but it's ultimately on our management team for putting them in a position where they could do.
Really interesting how you put that on there. So, if you're putting it on management or leadership, what are they evaluating? What are they evaluating, or how are they evaluating? Is there a metric to help them understand, you know, the level of mistake? I can't remember. Justin, help me with the terminology. Are that people are promoted to the level of their incompetence? I think I think that what I heard once.
I'm not sure what you're referring to. Are you saying promoted in spite of their incompetence?
No, they're promoted.
Okay.
So they're really great at the level of job that they are at. But if they get promoted, let's say into a leadership role or management role, all of a sudden they become incompetent in their role, even though they could do all the stuff below.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. The capacity component, because you're in a seat that's too big for you, then it deteriorates the quality of what your output is. I don't have a fancier way to say that though.
So that evaluation, right?
Yeah.
Putting someone into a position, if it's up to the leader, is there a metric, or is there a way to define that?
There's not a metric or a way to define it clearly that I can think of, but it's more so that person, the project manager or whoever's managing that project, that new hire, they should be working closely enough with that person with that engineer to have a pretty good feel for what their capabilities are. And then we also have a quality control process where our senior engineers are reviewing the work done by EITs or engineers in training. So through that process, we should be making sure that expectations are clear, that the EIT knows when to ask questions and that they don't go off the rails in the wrong direction, and that their work's being reviewed to make sure we're not putting out any mistakes or very minimal mistakes that don't have a large impact.
Okay. So this is a constant evaluation. This isn't a thing that happens today, tomorrow. It's a constantly reevaluated.
Largely, yeah. because engineers get better over time, just like anybody, as they're in the role more and work on different types of projects. Or it may be that engineer A is familiar with data centers and they've worked on several data center projects and they're really good at those. And we know that if we keep them on that type of project, they're going to do good, consistent work. But if we put them on a stadium project that they've never worked on before, we're going to have to watch them very closely and make sure that they understand what they're doing and what they need to do. So a lot of it comes back to knowing your team and what they're good at and what their strengths are.
When do you think that becomes a reality? We talked about when you're at a large company, there's more specialization in role, right? Like that's
right.
That's piece of it. So as a small company, a lot of hats. Okay, so when do you see some more of that change to that specialization? Like, hey, like you are, the head of data centers, you're the head of stadiums, or you're the, like when does that essentially organization or accountability chart start becoming more real?
So right now we're at 13 people. I think each year as we grow, we're kind of reevaluating that and kind of thinking through our org chart, kind of how we're structured and makes sense. And I would say for us, like as we get past 15 or up to 16, 18 people, we probably need to structure things a little bit differently. Because right now I'm able to still stay involved with most projects and have a handle on most everything we have going on. But that's getting less and less each year, and more is being delegated to our project management team. And whereas a year and a half, 2 years ago, we only had 2 project managers, myself and our VP. Now we've got 5. So things are getting spread out more. And as we grow, it'll keep getting that way where things are being distributed more. Workload is being distributed more amongst more people. So yeah, I think it's something that is, as companies grow, you have to evaluate and see what makes sense at that point in time, because what we're doing now may not be good enough in 2 years. We may have to do things differently, or we will be doing things.
Sure. Yeah. So then when you have your strategy meetings, that becomes top concern. What about yourself, right? Obviously, when you started, you were the definitive doer. Like you did everything. You did it all. Now, 13 people. So now that there's a lot more, we call it the business side, right? Not the service execution side, but like hey, I have to run a business. Like, what does that kind of balance look like now for you?
Yeah. So kind of along the same lines, every year, I think I'm doing less production engineering. At this point, I'm doing very little production on projects. It's more coordination on projects, review of projects, talking strategy, big picture approaches, and then also the sales and business development and overseeing all the other aspects of the business. So I've learned that I enjoy the business. I really enjoy engineering, but I also really enjoy the business side of things. And I like both, which is great because I think it could be easy to just want to stay doing engineering and put off all the business side of things. But there's a few things I don't enjoy doing, but for the most part, enjoy business aspects. But that's something too that we're trying to offload, or not offload, but help set up different people to help out more in different areas, whether it be estimating or our office managers taking a big role in a new software system we're trying to set up for proposals for CRM for 25. And it's great to have additional people on our team to count on to help move those efforts forward, because there used to be a time when if I wasn't working, nothing happened with the business.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big step. Once we had a couple employees, it kind of hit me one day, like I went on a site visit or something, and it's like, work is actually being done right now while I'm not in the office doing it. And that was pretty cool.
It's a cool feeling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. This has been really great. We have one more question though that we want to ask you. And now that we know you're an avid listener, you probably know what's coming, but nonetheless, we'll ask it anyways. Tyler, if you could go back 20 years, what advice would you give yourself? Oh, maybe you didn't know it was coming. I think you did though.
Maybe I didn't think about it enough.
Yeah, perhaps.
I guess trust the process and know that as you always keep improving, and know that if you keep doing that, it'll work out, I guess, and keep learning.
Yeah, well, you're doing a lot of the right stuff because obviously the accolades and the growth definitely shows it. So kudos to you on keep it. keep improving and trusting the process. Good advice. We're going to throw all social stuff and all that fun stuff in the show notes, but if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that?
LinkedIn works, or email's great, but I'm active on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest place to find me and reach out.
Okay. That works. And then is there anything else you'd like to tell the people before we say our goodbyes?
I think we've about covered it. So I appreciate you guys having me on the podcast. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, cool. Listeners, this is Tyler Sease, founder of SSE, or Southern Structural Engineers, right? That's right.
Southern Steel Engineers.
Steel. Wow. Structure and steel. We talked too much about steel structure. Southern Steel Engineers. And until next time, adios.
Thanks for listening to Building Scale. To help us reach even more people, please share this episode with a friend, a colleague, or on social media.
Remember, the 3 pillars of scaling a business are people, process, and technology.
And our mission is to help the AEC industry protect itself by making technology easy.
So if you think your company's technology pillar could use some improvement, book a call with us to see how we can help maximize your IT and cybersecurity strategy. Just go to buildingscale.net/help.
And until next time,
Keep building scale.
Scale.